archaeological antiquity of an object and for archaeology in general. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Ça bouge plus? Reprendre le diaporama? Ah ben là, c'est pas le début. Là, c'était le début de mon. Là, on est beaucoup plus loin. Voilà. Alors, so geology was not only a tool for evidence, for drawing evidence. It was also a framework. It became a framework for prehistoric chronology. So, in the attempt to establish cultural divisions of the Paleolithic period, there was a number of attempts to constitute prehistoric chronologies. Boucher de Perthes himself had made the difference, as I said, between Celtic, Polish tools, and antediluvian antiquities, that is, these objects which were chipped, not polished. John Lubbock will give them another name, not Celtic and antediluvian, but Neolithic and Paleolithic. And this is a major difference, which is today still in use. Edouard Lartet, who was a great paleontologist and who was living in this region and who had a great role in the exploration of the Vézère Valley, and his son also was one of the great pioneers of prehistory in this region, Lartet proposed another kind of chronology based on the succession of animal species associated with early man. Some other people like Piet also insisted on the idea to include the art and the chronology of art within this chronology. And Mortillier was finally the one who drew the chronologies that is today still in use. So I will give you a few clues on this. So Lartet had done cave exploration, especially in the Pyrenees at Aurignac. And he had explored a number of sites along the Vézère Valley, including Le Moustier, La Madeleine, La Gorge d'Enfer, Laugerie Haute, Laugerie Basse at Les Aisies. And his observations brought more evidence to the coexistence of man and fossil animals, contributing to the rehabilitation of deposits in caves and under shelter in a debate which had been essentially developed on the deposit of alluvial terraces, as I showed. Lartet refined the concept of stratigraphic associations and extended it over time to propose a chronology based on animal species that coexisted with early man. So his idea was to anyway, for Lartet, he tried to distinguish ages of human prehistory through the animals which were associated with them. Oui, c'est un peu plus loin. On doit faire aussi, we should also care for the people who listen to us from elsewhere in the world. And so Lartet proposed a chronology which was based on the animals. So he distinguished the age of aurochs, the age of reindeer, the age of mammoths, and the age of the great bear. So this was his first chronology. He made many attempts at this, and he tried to exemplify this from different sites. So he was very eager to try to demonstrate this, but it didn't work very well because animals tend to be in different, the same animal in different ages, or animals disappeared in some region and remained in others. So the chronology was not very rigorous, although he was very eager to promote this kind of classification. Actually, the name, the age of the reindeer for the latest time of the Paleolithic has remained until now. People speak of l'âge du renne for the Magdalenian, but the other ages have not been very much used. Piet, as I said, who discovered wonderful sites of ivory sculpture in the southwest of France, near the Pyrenees in Brassampouy, Piet proposed not only the tools as clues for the different periods, not only the animals, but also the different art objects that had been found in the Upper Paleolithic. So this was another kind of classification, which was also which was abandoned actually. So the one who was really seminal for this classification was Gabriel de Mortillier, who since 1867 proposed to classify prehistoric cultures through the industries, through the artifacts that had been recognized and through the different kinds of artifacts. And so he drew this column of the succession of industries from different regions, especially regions of France, because France was really the center of this research. Acheulean, as we have seen, Chelian, Mousterian from here, Moustier, Solutrean from the Solutré, Magdalenian from La Madeleine near here, etc. So there was a way to name the cultures from the actual site, the eponym sites. And thus Mortillier's classification makes geology not only a way of evidence, but also a tool and even a paradigm for prehistoric archaeology classifications. He constitutes a scientific language by giving the industries, the tools, the names of the sites, just as the geologists had done. In geology, you name the different strata from the places where they have been found, Devonian, etc. So here you have the Mousterian, the Aurignacian, the Magdalenian, which refer to the actual places where these cultures have been found. And just like d'Orbigny had done in his chart of geological strata, here artifacts are used to characterize prehistoric industries and culture, and they are named as director fossils, the fossil which make you recognize the entire culture. So a specific tool, for example, an Acheulean biface or a Châtel-Perron knife, etc., is like a typical object that will be used to name and recognize the culture. So these are really geological methods which are applied directly to prehistoric naming. So I would like to conclude quickly by stressing at the same time the triumphs and perhaps the limit of the geological model in prehistoric archaeology. By the end of the 19th century, the different disciplines, animal and human paleontology, evolutionary biology, prehistoric archaeology, had won their autonomy. So, for example, evolutionary biology would criticize to some extent the gradualist models and other limits imposed by the geological model. So there was some evolution of the knowledge, which to some extent get rid of the geological framework. In prehistoric archaeology, people saw that there were limits to geological proof as the only proof for the antiquity of an object. For example, I go to the next. For example, there were fakes. It was only, you could only put an object at the bottom of a place, and here say that it was really, and prove that it was old. For example, that happened with the Mâchoire de Moulin-Quignon in the north of France. But this is a very recent jaw that was just put by the workers at the bottom of the section, just because they were paid to bring material, and human, of course, material was very much awaited by the researchers. So there was a big debate around this jaw, and actually the big this big reunions of paleontologists, archaeologists, etc., and geologists, finally concluded that it was authentic, just because the only proof that was considered was the geological proof. There was no anatomical way to prove at that time, this was in 1863, that this was not a fossil jaw. They didn't know anything about the fossil humans yet. So it's only later, by comparison, when paleontology, human paleontology would develop, that it was possible to go over the geological evidence and find paleontological features that would illustrate the fact that it was a fake or an authentic fossil. The same happens with the Piltdown forgery. Piltdown is also considered old because it is supposed to be found in gravels that represent a very antique place, antique strata. And so the evidence for Piltdown is mainly geological. And you know the story, and you know that Piltdown was obviously a fake. So there are limits to consider geology as the sole proof for the antiquity of fossil and of an archaeological remains. There are also limits that later have been stressed on the use of some concept, for example, the concept of fossil, direct fossil, the use of vertical succession of strata, whereas archaeological well know that there are cultural diversifications and diffusions which are not only thinkable in vertical succession. So these are probably the limits of the unique use of geology in demonstrating prehistoric features. But today, not only geology is involved in evidence and in the framework of prehistoric archaeology, but there is a strong interdisciplinary work with a number of other disciplines involved. So I conclude, in many ways, geological methods and concepts remain essential today to the practice and interpretations in prehistoric archaeology. Today, we don't speak of archaeo-geology, but we speak of geo-archaeology. It's just a small change, but it is really a kind of a novel domain, which includes, of course, stratigraphy and biostratigraphy as an essential framework to archaeological practice and research, which includes also geomorphology and climatology as essential endeavors for as understanding the formation of sites and the way the Earth's surface processes can mold landscapes. And we have seen these landscapes in Christophe's pictures this morning, which also includes soil formation and the distribution of minerals as a framework to the study of interactions between humans and their environments. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudine, for this very nice presentation of the premise of the archaeology. Have you some question to Claudine? Yes.
Thank you, Claudine, for this marvelous paper. I have a little question. Those naturalists or archaeologists or antiquarians in the provinces, did they have a kind of network? Did they gather together to bypass barriers or to make them stronger? Or no, they were working isolated?
Well, in France, amateurs were not very much respected. It's the contrary in England. For example, I quoted the Brixham Cave digs where Pingelly was an amateur, but he was working with the greatest scientists of his time. In France, there was a kind. France is a very centralized country, and what happened in Paris was really important. That were That's where all the great savants were, where the academies were. And in the provinces, you had small academies, but they didn't have much power in the 19th century. They did have power in the 18th century, but in the 19th century, they were just, you know, a reunion of amateurs, sometimes medical doctors, sometimes people who had some knowledge, but who were not very much respected in general. And so they generally were isolated. Some of them tried to make their knowledge better known. And Boucher de Perthes, for example, paid his own publications. Many of his publications were made at his own expense. And he even published in a Paris press to have his works recognized. But when he asked the academicians from Paris to come to see the evidence, they didn't move. And the boxes that he had sent were not almost not considered. There was another pioneer who was very interesting, Paul Tournal, who worked in bees near Carcassonne. He had very interesting views in caves, but very interesting views on the contemporaneity of animals and humans. And what he did was to send his material to Cuvier. And Cuvier even didn't open the box, you know, and that was in 1830. And you can say that he was too early, or he addressed the wrong person to make his works known. But Paris was the center, so you had to.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I read somewhere in a book of Al-Hamadani about silver and gold.
What?
About silver and gold, exploitation of mines of silver and gold.
Yes.
The distinction between Islamic periods and pre-Islamic periods. I ask, we say that archaeologists used tools to and related them to epochs and civilizations. I ask if some of first archaeologists used the exploitation of mines techniques to relative dissertation or not.
Well,
in France or in Europe.
Mining techniques were always, mining excavations were always very important for the knowledge of the underground. And even the concept of stratigraphy, of biostratigraphy, was first made by people who were doing works, excavations or making wells or a road or train lines, etc. So there is, of course, a convergence between mining works and finds and reflection on the antiquity of animals and the antiquity of man. Of course, this is a very, very strong connection, and it can be exemplified through many, many examples. Yes.
Thank you so much, Claudine, for your very inspiring talk. For your very inspiring talk. So I would like to, and I thank you for putting the finger on terms and chronology and stratigraphy. But I'm interested in this, if there's any connection to the German cognition about the pre-world, because this term was very, very strong in German country, the pre-world, which was antiquity, geology. It brought all the fields together. So have you any connection where the reflection on this term? Because it's another worlds of thinking. If you say it's a pre-world and not antiquity, there's another issue.
Well, I think the idea of a pre-world or the idea of a former world is certainly present in Occidental culture from Lucrece and a long history of humanity. I don't know the context of German thinking, I'm sorry, but for sure, the idea that there is a former world or pre-world is present. I don't know how much it is seminal for the establishment of archaeology. And I don't know how much it is connected to actual research on associations or finds and combination of animal and human evidence. So I'm sorry, I don't know the context of the German research, but there is certainly at the same period, probably, connection. There are not connections, as I know, between the French and the German research, but it would be an interesting field to explore.
Just